Is Syria finally stabilising? It's now been 6 months since the 50-year-old Assad regime was toppled in the country. But while this sent shockwaves throughout the Middle East and the broader international community, many were concerned about the implications it would have for a country that's long been regarded as a pivotal actor in the region. So, half a year on, how is Syria now doing? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security and statehood. We often tend to think that when a side wins a civil war, the conflict is over and the country enters a new phase of peace and stability. But of course, this is usually far from the case. The new regime often faces a multitude of problems. As well as the challenge of establishing a new government, they're also faced with stabilising the economy. And in many cases, the internal security situation remains precarious as other factions, including elements loyal to the previous regime, often continue to fight on. To add to all this, external parties can often complicate efforts to ease the situation. An excellent example of this is Syria. Since overthrowing the Assad regime, the new administration has faced numerous internal and external challenges. But 6 months on, is the country finally on the path to stability? Syria, more officially known as the Syrian Arab Republic, is situated in the Middle East. To its north lies Turkey, to its east is Iraq, and to its south is Jordan. To its west, it shares borders with Israel and Lebanon and has a Mediterranean coastline. While its population is estimated to be around 21 million, exact figures are unavailable as many millions fled the country during the civil war. And while most Syrians are Arab, there are also Kurdish, Circassian and Turkic communities. As for religion, while 3/4 of the population are Sunni Muslims, the country also has Christians and other Muslim minorities, including Shia, Druze and Alawites. While Syria has a long history that stretches back to ancient times, after centuries of Ottoman rule, it came under French control following the First World War. This lasted until 1945, when it gained its independence and became a founding member of the United Nations. However, following independence, the country soon fell into political turmoil. Following its unsuccessful attack on the new state of Israel in 1948, the country experienced prolonged unrest. As well as a succession of military coups between 1949 and 1961, it also entered a brief political union with Egypt, becoming the United Arab Republic. But in the end, things began to change in 1966, when a young Alawite Air Force general, Hafez al-Assad, became Minister of Defence, thus beginning his rise to power. Although Syria suffered another defeat in the 1967 war against Israel, Assad held on to his position, and in 1970 he led another coup, becoming president the following year. Assad's presidency marked a turning point for Syria, imposing an authoritarian and highly repressive regime that elevated Alawites to key government roles. He focused Syrian foreign policy against the West, as well as becoming a major opponent of Israel and the United States, earning Syria the label of a state sponsor of terrorism. Assad expanded the country's regional influence by intervening in Lebanon and aligning with Iran. But after 30 years in power, Hafez al-Assad died in 2000 and was succeeded by his son, Bashar. Although the younger Assad was initially seen as a potential reformer, he in fact continued his father's dictatorship. However, in 2011, everything changed with the start of the Arab Spring. As mass protests erupted in Syria, Assad launched a brutal crackdown, and from there the country quickly descended into civil war. At first, the opposition appeared to be gaining the upper hand, especially as much of the Arab world and the international community lined up against the Assad regime. However, despite widespread calls for US and Western direct intervention to help the rebels, Washington refused.
But I have resisted calls for military action because we cannot resolve someone else's civil war through force.
With Russian military intervention combined with continuing support from Iran, government forces began to regain lost territory, and by 2020 the situation had been largely reversed. Although rebel and Kurdish groups still held areas in the north and northeast, and various Islamist groups continued to operate in the east, Assad had effectively reasserted control over most of the country. Indeed, having now seemingly won the war, Syria began to regain international acceptance, including full membership in the Arab League. But although the Syrian war now seemed to be over, things weren't quite as they appeared. Within the country, opposition forces were regrouping and strengthening their control over the northwest. Likewise, the international context was also changing. With Russia focused on Ukraine and Iran weakened following Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, the chance came to strike against Assad. In late November 2024, the civil war reignited. Led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, an offshoot of al-Qaeda that allied with Turkish-backed forces, the rebels launched a surprise offensive. With Assad's forces offering little resistance and no external support from traditional allies, they rapidly closed in on the country's capital, Damascus. On the 7th of December 2024, Assad fled to Moscow, marking the end of half a century of his family's rule. In his place, a new HTS government was formed under the group's leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, who became the new president of Syria. I hope you're finding this useful. If so, please do give it a like and perhaps subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. While the end of the Assad regime certainly marked a landmark moment for Syria, how has the country fared since then? In truth, it's been a mixed picture. First of all, there's the question of governance. While many may have cheered Assad's demise, many also feared the incoming administration, especially given HTS's links to al-Qaeda and al-Sharaa's militant past. But so far, things appear more positive than expected. At least on the surface, HTS has transitioned from Islamism to Syrian nationalism, and from a militant insurgent group to a national government. In January 2025, an interim constitution was introduced, and in March a cabinet was established under al-Sharaa. However, hopes that this will eventually lead to an inclusive democracy seem premature. Al-Sharaa has already suggested that it could take up to 5 years before elections are held, although many suspect that these may never in fact even happen. Furthermore, the government remains relatively unrepresentative. For instance, Hind Kabawat is the sole female and only Christian minister. Yet lurking behind this is a more profound fear. Despite the administration's relatively moderate tone, there are concerns that it may revert to its Islamist roots at some point in the future. As for international relations, the new government has had a better start than many expected. In marked contrast to the Taliban in Afghanistan, which remains shunned by the international community, many countries have given the new Syrian government the benefit of the doubt, at least for now. Aside from the strong support from Turkey, which has become a key international ally of the new government, many Arab states are working with the new administration. Likewise, many Western countries have also shown a willingness to engage with the new government. This was graphically highlighted when al-Sharaa met with US President Donald Trump in Saudi Arabia in mid-May. However, there are still grounds for concern. While the Syrian government has severed the country's ties with Iran, the government seems to be engaging with Russia, with reports suggesting that al-Sharaa may permit Moscow to maintain its military bases in Syria. This will no doubt worry Western observers. Furthermore, the relationship with Turkey may not be as firm as it outwardly appears. Skepticism towards Turkey is deeply rooted in much of the Arab world, particularly in the regions that were once under Ottoman control. This could eventually lead to tensions between the two neighbours. However, the most pressing issue is Israel. As the Assad regime collapsed, Israeli troops advanced further into the country, establishing a security zone and targeting critical military sites. While the Israeli government insists that this is temporary, many fear another land grab. In addition to the Golan Heights, which Israel seized in 1967 and annexed in 1981, this will further complicate peace talks between the two countries, something the US is now actively calling for. All the while, there are also fears that Syria may well become a proxy battleground for Israel and Turkey, an issue I covered in another recent video. Thirdly, the country also faces enormous economic challenges. The impact of the civil war has been immense. Much of the country's infrastructure has been destroyed, and estimates suggest that over 16 million people are still in need of humanitarian aid. In addition, the country faces a possible influx of returnees as many countries try to persuade refugees to return now that the war appears to be over. But again, there are signs of hope. Both the United States and the European Union have now lifted sanctions on the country. Meanwhile, Gulf Arab nations, including Saudi Arabia and Qatar, have stepped in to provide crucial support, including funds to pay government salaries. But while this should hopefully begin to alleviate the immediate economic problems, the longer-term picture is less certain. Syria requires enormous funds to rebuild, and without these, the overall situation may start to deteriorate. And this brings us to the fourth and most pressing immediate issue, the internal security situation. So far, the new government has consolidated its control over large parts of the country. Crucially, the prospect of a significant new conflict in the Kurdish-held northeast seems to have receded. Although the Kurds established considerable self-rule throughout the civil war, they've seemingly accepted the government's broad authority and the unity of the Syrian state. However, there are questions about how deeply rooted all this is, especially since the Kurdish areas will want formal autonomy under any new constitution. Meanwhile, there are still serious concerns in many other areas. For instance, there have been disturbing attacks against the minorities in the country, as was highlighted in March 2025 when Alawites were killed in what many saw as revenge attacks against the community. Likewise, tensions have also been growing with the country's Druze community. To add to all this, several armed groups continue to pose a major challenge. These include the Syrian Popular Resistance, made up of Assad loyalists, and Islamic State, which continues to operate in parts of the east. All the while, questions about the government's ideological agenda continue to worry many observers. For instance, the decision to integrate 3,500 foreign jihadists into the national army has raised fears about radicalisation. That said, the plan has been backed by the United States, which sees it as a way to keep the fighters in check. And it's for all these reasons that Syria's path to lasting peace and stability remains fraught with serious challenges. The complex mixture of governance, security and economic problems will pose significant challenges for the new government in the period ahead. But even if there may be doubts about the government's direction, there seems to be little choice but to press on and support al-Sharaa, at least for now. Whatever doubts may exist is also balanced by the realisation that there's no credible alternative and that Syria still faces numerous internal and external threats. If the administration falls, Syria could well be plunged into even deeper chaos. While Assad may now be gone, Syria still faces a precarious future. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos on Syria and the Middle East that you might find useful. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.